The first sound was the hiss of hydraulic lines at 6:42 in the morning. It was a specific sound, a pressurized sigh that cuts through the quiet hum of a suburban Tuesday. I was on my porch, in my worn armchair, a mug of black coffee, warming my hands. The morning was cool, dew still clinging to the blades of grass on my lawn, each one a tiny, perfect prism. Then came the second sound, the low, guttural rumble of a diesel engine idling too close, and the rhythmic, metallic clank of a chain being unspooled. I didn't move. I just watched, and I took a slow sip of my coffee. A large, white flatbed tow truck was backing into my driveway. The reverse alarm, a shrill and insistent beep, 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 was an assault on the morning A's peace. A man in a grease-stained jumpsuit hopped out and began hooking a heavy chain to the front axle of my Sonos truck. It was a 1988 Ford, a 450. Candy apple red, a vehicle my boy, David, and my late father had spent 2 years restoring. It was not just a truck, it was a museum of scraped knuckles, shared laughter, and grease under the fingernails. It sat where David had parked it 5 months ago, just before he shipped out for his second deployment. Standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, was Karen Vance. She was the president of the Northwood Estates Homeowners Association. She wore a pink velour tracksuit that seemed to vibrate with self-importance. Beside her stood 2 other board members, a man named Gerald, and a woman I knew only as Brenda. They looked uncomfortable, like unwilling accomplices at a crime scene. Karen, however, was beaming. She held a clipboard like a royal scepter. I set my mug down on the small wicker table beside me. The ceramic made a soft click. I didn't get up. I just watched the tow truck driver work. He was efficient, focused, clearly just a man doing a job. He avoided looking at me. Karen, on the other hand, stared directly at my house, at my porch, as if daring me to emerge. I decided to let the moment steep, like a good tea. Panic is a weak position. Silence is a question that demands an answer. Finally, when the chains were taut, and the Truca's front wheels were just beginning to lift off the pavement, I stood up. I walked calmly down the porch steps and onto the grass. I stopped at the edge of my driveway, about 20 feet from her. I didn't say a word. "A good morning, Colonel," she said, her voice dripping with a cloying false sweetness. She always used my retired rank, but she wielded it like an insult, a way of marking me as old, out of touch, a relic. "As you can see, we are finally dealing with the blight." I looked at the truck, then back at her. My face remained neutral. I had spent 30 years in the Army JAG Corps. I had faced down generals with egos the size of aircraft carriers and lawyers who could find loopholes in the laws of physics. Karen Vance and her clipboard were not an intimidating sight. "The board has voted," she announced, puffing out her chest. "The vehicle has been parked, unmoved, for more than 90 days. ETA's in violation of Article 7, Section 4 of the Covenants. ETA's classified as an inoperable abandoned vehicle. WAVE issued 3 notices." She tapped her clipboard for emphasis. This is the final step. ETA is being impounded." I remained silent. I let her words hang in the air. I could see the tow truck driver pause, looking from her to me, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Gerald shuffled his feet. And Brenda was suddenly very interested in a crack in the sidewalk. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Karen pressed, her voice rising. The sweetness was gone, replaced by the sharp, grating tone of a petty tyrant enjoying her power. "This is your last chance." Well, there is no last chance. This truck is an eyesore and it is leaving." I took a slow breath. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't raise it to record. Not yet. I simply held it. "Karen," I said, and my voice was low. And even if that truck belongs to a United States Army sergeant currently deployed in a combat zone, you are towing the property of an active duty soldier. Jay, she scoffed. A short, ugly sound. That is a lovely story. But it doesn't matter. The rules are the rules. We sent the notices to this address. They were in it, answered. End of story. Those notices were answered, I said, still calm. I sent a certified letter to the HOA board 3 weeks ago, complete with a copy of my son's deployment orders and my power of attorney. As stipulated under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, the law is quite clear. On this matter, a flicker of something, a confusion, maybe annoyance, crossed her face. It was the first crack in her performative armor. We never received any such letter. You did? I said. I have the signed receipt from the post office. Brenda Wilson signed for it at 10:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. I glanced at the woman who was now studying the crack in the sidewalk, if it were the Rosetta Stone. Brenda's face went pale. Karen's eyes narrowed. The mask of the pleasant neighborhood enforcer was gone. This was the real Karen. It does matter. That federal law does not supersede our covenants. This is private property. We have our own rules. As she turned to the tow truck driver, get it out of here now. The driver hesitated. He looked at me. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of my head. I held up my phone and pressed the record button. The small red light was barely visible. But I made sure Karen saw the motion. You are being recorded, Karen, I said, my voice now carrying the weight of legal formality. For the record, please state your name and your official position. I am Karen Vance, president of the Northwood Estates HOA, she snapped, falling into the trap. And I am authorizing the removal of this abandoned vehicle, in accordance with our governing documents. You are authorizing the illegal seizure of property belonging to a protected service member. I corrected her. You have been formally notified of his status, and you are proceeding anyway. And Idacat. Are you aware that this action may carry significant civil and even criminal penalties? Don't you threaten me with your lawyer talk, she shrieked. The performance was back, but this time it was for the benefit of the driver and her 2 board members. It was a show of dominance. You, old men, think you can bully everyone. The neighborhood is sick of this junk heap. Get it out of here. The driver, caught between a screaming woman with a clipboard and a calm old man talking about federal law, made his choice. He chose the screaming woman. He climbed back into his cab. The engine revved, the hydraulics whined, and my Sonus truck, the last project he shared with his grandfather, was dragged unceremoniously out of my driveway and onto the street. I didn't shout. I didn't run after them. I simply stood on my lawn and filmed the entire thing. I filmed the truck being pulled away. I filmed Karen Vance watching it go, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face. I filmed her turning to me, giving a little wave, and walking away. I kept recording until the tow truck turned the corner at the end of the block and was gone. Then I stopped the recording, saved the file, and walked back to my porch. I picked up my now lukewarm coffee. I took a sip. She had no idea. She had no idea what she had just done. She thought she had won a battle over a parking spot. She had no idea she had just declared war on a man who had spent 30 years writing the very rule books she thought she could ignore. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain. This was not about a truck. It was never about the truck. It started years ago, with things much smaller. This was simply the final, flagrant transgression that could no longer be ignored. I'm Colonel James Peterson, United States Army, retired. My specialty in the J Corps was not courtroom litigation. it was contracts, regulations, and administrative law. I was one of the people who wrote the impossibly dense, mind-numbingly detailed rules that govern military procurement and operations. My entire professional life was dedicated to the principle that order is created and maintained by clear, unambiguous, and fairly enforced rules. I find a certain quiet beauty in a well-written regulation. After my wife Martha passed away 5 years ago, and with David grown and in the service himself, I retired to this quiet suburban neighborhood, seeking precisely that: order, peace, a life without conflict. David is my only child. He's a good man, better than me in many ways. He has his mother's kindness and his grandfather's hands. He can fix anything. When he announced he was enlisting, I was proud and terrified, as any parent would be. He chose the army, like me, but he went infantry. He wanted to be at the sharp end. Before his first deployment, he and my father, who was in his final years then, bought that old Ford. It was a wreck. They spent every weekend for 2 years in my garage, turning it from a rust bucket into a work of art. My dad passed away just after they finished it. So the truck, is more than metal and paint. It is my father's last lesson to my son. It is the smell of oil and the sound of their laughter that I can still sometimes hear from the garage. When David is deployed, the truck sitting in the driveway is my quiet reminder that he is coming home. Karen Vance moved into the neighborhood about 8 years ago. She was charismatic, organized, and full of energy. She started a neighborhood watch, organized block parties. Within 2 years, she was elected HOA president. And that is when things began to change. The Friendly Neighborhood Association became an instrument of her will. The first sign was the mailboxes. Our covenant stated that mailboxes should be of a uniform and neat appearance. For 20 years that meant you kept it from rusting. And the post wasn't crooked. Karena's board issued a new rule, an act clarification, that all mailboxes had to be the exact same model, purchased from a specific company for $300. Then it was lawn ornaments, holiday decorations. The color of your front door each month brought a new, more restrictive interpretation of the decades-old covenants. Fines were issued for grass that was a 1/4 inch too high, for garbage cans left out an hour too long. Most people, myself included, just paid the small fines. It was easier than fighting. We wanted peace. What we didn't realize was that we were funding our own oppression. We were feeding the beast. I kept the receipts. 5 for every $25 fine for a stray dandelion. For every $50 penalty for my garden hose. Not being perfectly coiled, I paid by check, and I filed the cash check and the violation notice in a folder. It was an old habit from my procurement days. Document everything. Create a paper trail. The folder grew thick over the years. It was a quiet, methodical record of escalating tyranny. I would see her berating old Mr. Rowe Henderson about the color of his prize-winning roses, or measuring the height of the Robinson family's basketball hoop with a tape measure. I just watched, and I made notes. The issue with Davis' truck began subtly. About a month after he deployed, I got the first notice. A polite, four-letter slip tucked under my windshield wiper. A vehicle appears to have been stationary for over 30 days. Please refer to Article 7, Section 4. I ignored it. A week later, another one. Then, a formal violation. Notice in the mail with a $100 fine. This was her pattern, escalate from suggestion to penalty. That is when I decided to act, but to act on my terms, within my own field of expertise. I didn't go to a board meeting to argue. I didn't confront her on the street. I went to my desk. I drafted a formal letter. I cited my SONA's name, rank, and status as an active duty service member. I cited the Service Members Civil Relief Act, specifically 50 U.S. Code of 3955, which provides protections against the enforcement of storage liens on the property of service members during military service. I included a copy of his deployment orders, with sensitive information redacted. I included a notarized copy of the power of attorney he had given me. I made 2 copies of the entire package, one for my files, one to be sent. I walked to the post office and sent the letter via certified mail with return receipt requested. A beautiful little system. For a few extra dollars, you get a green postcard back with the signature of the person who received your letter and the date they signed for it. It is a legal receipt that proves delivery. It turns an accusation of a never got into potential perjury. A week later, the green card came back. Signature: Brenda Wilson. Date: the 17th of October. I smiled. I stapled the green card to my copy of the letter and placed it in the folder. On paper, the matter was resolved. I had followed the rules. I had provided the documentation. I had invoked a federal law that superseded any HOA covenant. I had done my part. I assumed that would be the end of it. I underestimated her arrogance. She had no idea how thoroughly I had just documented her next mistake before she even made it. The tow truck had been gone for less than an hour. I sat at my dining room table, the thick folder open before me. It was a manila folder, bulging with 5 years of petty tyranny. Violation notices, cashed checks, photographs. IA taken of Karen measuring hedges with a laser level, my own handwritten notes of conversations and incidents. It was a testament to the slow erosion of a community's peace. But it was incomplete. It was a defensive document. The time for defense was over. I picked up the phone and called a number I had not dialed in years. Sarah, I said when she answered. Aida's James Peterson. Sarah had been my paralegal for the last 10 years of my career at the firm I joined after leaving the Army. She was sharper than most of the lawyers we worked with a bloodhoundess instinct for finding the one loose thread in a mountain of paperwork. Colonela, she said, her voice warm. I was just thinking about you the other day. How is retirement treating you? It was treating me very well until about an hour ago, I said to Sarah. I need to retain your services on a personal matter. I need research, documentation, and your particular brand of methodical skepticism. There was a pause, and then I could hear the faint sound of typing. Opening a file? Give me the short version. I gave it to her. The HOA, Karen Vance, the truck, the deployment, the certified letter, the tow this morning. I was concise, sticking to the facts. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Ah, wow, she finally said. Ah, she really did that. Towed a Solgeris truck while he was deployed. After being formally notified. She did, I confirmed. She believes her HOA covenants are the supreme law of the land. She's about to have a very expensive education, Sarah said. And I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. Okay, Colonel. What do you need first? Everything, I said. I want the HOA's Articles of Incorporation. I want the full recorded history of the covenants and all amendments filed with the county. I want the minutes from every board meeting for the last 5 years. I want the state's statutes on homeowners associations, specifically regarding fines, liens, and vehicle removal. Costs. I also want you to run a full background on Karen Vance and the tow company she used. I want to know if they are properly licensed and insured. I want to know if she has a history of this. Consider it done, Sarah said. I'll have a preliminary package for you by end of day tomorrow. Where did they take the truck? I don't know yet. I admitted. The driver didn't say. and I didn't ask. I needed to let the illegal act complete itself without interference. Find out a good? Don't pay them anything. Let them dig the hole deeper, she advised. Just find out where it is. We'll need that for the demand letter. There won't be a demand letter, Sarah, I said quietly. What? Colonel, that is the first step. A strongly worded letter from Consola. She ignored a certified letter citing federal law, I interrupted. A demand letter from a lawyer will just be another piece of paper for her to wave around and mock. No, this is not about getting the truck back tomorrow. This is about ensuring this never happens again to anyone in this neighborhood. We are not going to play on her field. We're going to build our own, and the price of admission will be the rule of law. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Okay, Colonel, she said, her voice now deadly serious. All I understand. I am on it after the call. I got to work. My first task was to find the truck. A few calls to non-emergency police dispatch and other local tow yards, describing the truck and the time of the tow, quickly led me to a Viper Recovery and Storage. I looked them up online. Their lot was in an industrial area on the other side of the county. Their reviews were a horror story of predatory fees and rude staff. Perfect. Karen hadn't just picked a tow company. She'd picked one that would maximize the damage. She was building my case for me. My next step was to formalize my own position. I went to my home office and printed a fresh copy of my power of attorney for David. I printed a copy of his birth certificate. I printed the truck's title and registration, both in his name. I printed my driver's license. I was preparing my identity and my standing, putting it on paper. Then, I turned to the HOA's own rules. I had a copy of the original covenants from when I bought the house. I read Article 7, Section 4, the one she had cited. It was vaguely worded, no inoperable or abandoned vehicles may be parked in public view for an extended period. It did not define inoperable. It did not define extended period. It was the kind of sloppy, ambiguous language that a tyrant like Karen could twist to her own ends. The 90-day rule she spouted was not in the original covenants. It had to be in an amendment or a separate board resolution. That would be in the document Sarah was pulling. Late the next afternoon, Sarah sent me a secured encrypted link to a digital folder. It was a thing of beauty. Every document I had asked for was there, neatly labeled. I spent the next 8 hours reading. I read until my eyes burned. I read the meeting minutes, tracing Karena's rise to power. I saw the votes on the mailboxes, the lawn rules, the ever-increasing schedule of fines. I saw how she would propose something, and the board, mostly made up of her friends or people too cowed to object, would rubber stamp it, and then I found it. An amendment to Article 7, passed 2 years ago. It was the one that defined a extended periada as 90 days, and gave the board the authority to tow. I read it carefully. It was poorly drafted, but it seemed legitimate on the surface. It was signed by all 5 board members at the time. It was notarized. It was filed with the county recorder's office. I was about to move on when something caught my eye. The notarious seal. The name was familiar. I'd seen it before. I cross-referenced it with another document in Sarah's file. The ESCO's annual corporate filing with the state. The notary public who had certified the amendment was Gerald, the same man who had been standing on the sidewalk with Karen, shuffling his feet. It was legal for a board member to notarize a document, though not best practice. But something still felt off. I called Sarah. Sarah, I need you to do one more thing for me. The notary on the Article 7 amendment. His name is Gerald Finley. I need you to check his notary commission status with the Secretary of State. I want to know if he was in good standing on the date of that notarization on, she said. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice was different. It was the voice she used when Shade found the jugular. "A Colonel, she said. And the word was crisp. You are not going to believe this. Gerald Finley's notary commission was revoked by the state 6 months before he notarized that amendment. He failed to maintain his required bond. On the date that document was signed, he had no legal authority to act as a notary public." I closed my eyes. There it was. The bombshell. The single critical, undeniable fact that would unravel everything, which means I prompted, wanting her to say the words. Which means the notarization is invalid, she said, her voice electric with the thrill of the chase. And since the state's HOA statutes require all covenant amendments to be formally notarized before being filed, the amendment itself is void. It has no legal effect. As a worthless piece of paper. I leaned back in my chair. The foundation of Karen's authority to tow the truck was not just cracked. It did not exist. She had acted based on a rule that was on paper a legal fiction. She had no idea. She thought she was enforcing a rule. She was in fact committing grand theft auto with a fraudulent document as her excuse, and I had the receipts. All of them. The next morning, Karen escalated, as I knew she would. Emboldened by her victory with the truck, she turned her attention back to me personally. A crisp white envelope was taped to my front door. It was a friendly note. It was a formal notice of a special fine, $500 for a failure to comply with a board directive, and another $500 for creating a hostile environment for board members. The total was $1,000. The notice stated that if it wasn't paid within 10 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. I carefully peeled the tape off my door, took the notice inside, and placed it in my folder. It was another gift. Another piece of evidence documenting her overreach and vindictiveness. She was trying to intimidate me, to bury me in financial threats. What she was actually doing was handing me the rope she would use to hang herself. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, I answered. Is this James Peterson? A woman's voice asked. It is. This is Karen Vance. I'm just calling to make sure you received the latest notice. We don't want any more lost mile excuses. Her tone was smug and condescending. I received it, I said calmly. Good. And I just wanted to let you know that tow company, they charge $200 a day for storage. Plus, the initial tow fee. It's already been 2 days. Let us see nearly $1,000 you owe them. Plus the $1,000 you owe us. This is getting expensive for you, isn't it? You should have just moved the truck, Colonel A. I let the silence sit for a moment. Karen, I said, my voice flat. Have you ever read the Uniform Commercial Code, specifically Article 7, regarding warehouse receipts and bills of lading? There was a confused pause. I continued as if discussing the weather. It governs the rights and duties of bailees, people who take possession of property that is not theirs. It has very specific rules about liens. For a lien to be valid, the storage must be lawful. You might want to look into that. You might also want to look up 18 U.S. Code 81021, which deals with fraudulent notarizations. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Are you threatening me? No, Karen. I'm educating you. There's a difference. Have a nice day. I hung up the phone. The time for quiet documentation was drawing to a close. The time for a public lesson was about to begin. But I wasn't quite ready. There was one more thing I needed to do. 2 days later, Karen made her most audacious move yet. Confident that I was on the ropes, she decided to make an example of me for the entire neighborhood. She called the police. I was in my garden, pulling weeds, when a county sheriff's patrol car pulled up to the curb. A young officer, his name tag read Miller, got out. He looked barely older than David. Karen was right behind him, marching onto my lawn like she owned it. "Officer, thank you for coming," she said in a loud, performative voice, clearly intended for any neighbors who might be watching. This is the man I told you about. James Peterson. He's been threatening me. I'm afraid for my safety." Officer Miller looked from her, flushed and dramatic, to me, in my dirt-stained jeans and gardening gloves. I slowly stood up, brushing the soil from my hands. I remained calm. I did not approach them. I let the officer control the space. "Sir," the officer said, his tone professional and neutral. "Mom, could you step back to the sidewalk, please? I'd like to speak with Mr. Peterson alone." Karen looked flustered. This was Nat going according to her script. She wanted to be center stage, directing the scene. But, officer, has the wanna, Please," he said, a little more firmly this time. She huffed and retreated, but stood there, arms crossed, watching. Officer Miller walked over to me. "Mr. Peterson, my name is Officer Miller. Yame here, because a resident, a Mrs. Vance, reported that you made threats against her over the phone." "AC," I said, "and what were the specific threats I am alleged to have made?" "She said you threatened her with illegal codes." He looked slightly embarrassed to even be saying it. I allowed myself a small, weary smile. "Officer, I am a retired attorney. I spent 30 years in the Army, JAG Corps. I did not threaten her. I advised her to read certain sections of state and federal law that are pertinent to a civil dispute we are having. There is a significant legal difference." He nodded slowly, his eyes assessing me. He was young, but he wasn't stupid. He could see the vast gulf between Karina's hysterical performance and my calm demeanor. "She also claims you're part of a dispute over a vehicle that was towed from your property," he said. That is correct," I said. "The vehicle belongs to my son, an active-duty Army sergeant. It was towed at her direction 2 days ago. She was informed of my son's protected status under the SCRA prior to the HOA, the SCRA." He asked. "The Service Members Civil Relief Act. It is a federal law that protects our troops from exactly this kind of action while they are deployed," I explained. His expression shifted subtly. It was a flicker of understanding, of respect. "Okay. I see." He glanced over his shoulder at Karen, who was now tapping her foot impatiently. "Look, sir. Jay's claiming harassment. She wants a report filed." "Aya would be delighted for you to file a report, officer," I said. In fact, I insist. I would like to make a formal statement for that report. May I?" He seemed taken aback. Yes, sir." "Of course." He took out his notepad. I began to speak, and I spoke as if I were dictating. "A legal document on Tuesday morning, at approximately 6:45 a.m. Karen Vance, president of the Northwood Estates, HOA, did direct a commercial tow operator to illegally seize a 1988 Ford 150 license plate. This action was taken despite her and the board having received formal written notification via certified mail that the vehicle's owner, Sergeant David Peterson, is an active-duty service member protected under the SCRA. This illegal seizure was followed by a telephonic communication initiated by Mrs. Vance, in which she attempted to extort funds related to the illegal tow. This was followed by a written demand for $1,000 in punitive fines, delivered to my home. Today she has summoned law enforcement under the false pretense that I have threatened her, in what appears to be a continued pattern of harassment. and intimidation. I paused. Officer Miller was writing furiously. Is that everything, sir? Just one more thing, I said. I walked into my house and returned with a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of the void amendment, the one notarized by the man with the revoked commission. I had highlighted the notarious signature and the date. I handed it to the officer. The authority she claims for the tow is based on this document, an amendment to the HOA covenants. The notarious commission was invalid at the time of signing, rendering this document legally void. You can verify that with the Secretary of State's office. Therefore, the seizure of my Sonus truck was not just a violation of federal law, but was also conducted with no legal authority under the HOA's own governing documents. It was, in effect, theft. He took the paper and looked at it. He looked at the highlighted section, then back at me. His face was a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes told a different story. They were wide, with a dawning comprehension of the scale of Karen's miscalculation. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, he said quietly. I will include all of this in my report. He walked back over to Karen. I couldn't hear what he said, but I could see her face. Her confident, indignant expression melted away, replaced by confusion, then anger. She started gesturing wildly, pointing at me. Officer Miller just stood there, notepad in hand, occasionally shaking his head. After a few minutes, she seemed to deflate. She turned and stormed back to her house. Officer Miller walked back to his car. Before he got in, he turned to me. For what Ida's worth, sir, he said, his voice low. My brother is in the Marines. He is in Okinawa right now. Thank your son for his service. Will, officer, I said. And thank you. He nodded, got in his car, and drove away. I stood there for a long moment. Karen thought she was calling in her cavalry. Instead, she had just created another official, neutral third-party record of her own malfeasance. She had invited the law to her front door, and the law had taken my statement. The folder on my dining room table had just gotten a little bit thicker. The incident with the police was a turning point. It was a public act, and it had been witnessed. The story, or at least Karen's version of it, spread through the neighborhood quickly. But so did the other side. The sight of a calm, elderly man in his garden being confronted by a frantic HOA president and a police officer, only for the officer to spend 10 minutes taking a statement from the old man, was a powerful piece of theater. It planted seeds of doubt. That evening, my doorbell rang. It was Mr. Henderson, from 2 houses down. He was a widower in his 80s. A gentle soul, whose entire life revolved around his magnificent rose garden. He'd been Karena's favorite target for years, getting fined for the uniform color of his blooms or the approved type of mulch he used. He stood on my porch, twisting a worn flat cap in his hands. Colonel Peterson, he began, his voice barely a whisper. I saw what happened today. With the police, was nothing to worry about. Henry, I said, opening the door wider. Please, come in. He stepped inside, looking around as if he were entering a lion's den. I heard what Shay's been doing. About your boy's truck. Ida's not right. Ida's just not right. He looked down at his cap. She has been bleeding me dry for years. $50 here, $100 there. My pensia. Ida's not much. I just pay it. Ida's easier. But this with your son a soldier His voice trailed off. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, cheap USB flash drive. I started after the 3rd time she came into my yard yelling. I started recording things on my phone. The board meetings. She doesn't know. She gets so excited, listening to her own voice, she doesn't notice. He held the drive out to me. His hand was trembling. There are 3 years of board meetings on here. All of them, the votes. The things she said about people when she thought no one was listening. The vote about your Sonus trucka, it is on there. Brenda and Gerald didn't want to do it. She bullied them into it. She told them you were a crazy old man and that the law was on her side. I took the flash drive from his hand. It felt heavier than it should. It was the weight of 3 years of quiet suffering and accumulated injustice. Henry, I said, my voice thick with emotion. This is an incredible risk you're taking. The biggest risk, he said, looking me straight in the eye for the first time. Doing nothing. You are fighting back. I am too old and too scared to fight like you. But I can give you ammunition. I put my hand on his shoulder. You're not scared, Henry. You are one of the bravest men I ever met. Thank you. After he left, I plugged the drive into my laptop. It was all there. Hours and hours of audio. The sound quality was poor, but Karena's shrill, commanding voice cut through the static every time. I found the meeting from a month ago. I listened as she brought up Davita's truck. I heard Brenda's hesitant voice saying, but Karen, his son, is deployed. James sent us a letter. And I heard Karena's dismissive reply, captured for posterity. That letter is a scare tactic. He cannot prove we got it. And even if he could, our rules are our rules. We have to make an example of him. Or everyone will think they can just ignore us. We vote now, Aya. The vote was 2-1, with the board as treasurer, a younger man named Marcus, voting with Karen. Brenda had abstained. It was all on the recording. Her admission that she had received the letter. Her stated intent to make an example of me. It was a prosecutor's dream. The next day, I received another call. This time the caller ID showed the name Marcus Thorne, the HOA treasurer. Mr. Peterson, said, his voice low and nervous. This is Marcus Thorne. From the HOA board, I know who you are. Marquis, I said, Look, I need to talk to you. Can I come by? Off the record. An hour later, he was sitting where Mr. Henderson had sat, but he looked far more terrified. He was a man in his late 30s, a financial analyst of some kind, who had clearly joined the board with good intentions and gotten swept up in Karena's cult of personality. I messed up, he said without preamble. I voted with her on the toe. I thought she showed us the amendment, the 90-day rule. She said it was all legal and above board. She said you were just being difficult. Now, I asked. And now she is out of control. After the police thing, she called an emergency board meeting. She wants to hire a law firm to sue you for defamation. She wants to double down. And the finances, they're a mess. She's been spending money from the reserve fund on a beautification projects that are really just for her own pet peeves. She had the curb in front of her house repoured and classified it as a common area repair. She's going to bankrupt the association. His words came out in a rush, a torrent of confession. Why are you telling me this, Marcus? I asked, my voice even. Because I have a conscience. And because I ran the numbers. The fines she's levied against you, the tow, the storage fees. If you sue and you win, the HOA's insurance will not cover it. Our policy has a clause that voids coverage for acts that are unknowingly illegal or fraudulent. If you can prove she knew about your son's status, or if there is something wrong with that amenda, the board members could be held personally, financially liable. His eyes wide with fear. She's going to ruin us all? I leaned forward. The amendment she showed you. The one about the 90-day rule. It was notarized by Gerald Finley. Wasn't it? Marcus nodded. Yes. He notarizes everything for us. Marcus. I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said. Gerald Finley is Notary commission was invalid on the date. He signed that document. The amendment has no legal force. Every action taken based on it, including the tow, was illegal. I.A. The color drained from Marcoux's face. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Oh my God, the next HOA meeting is in 1 week," I said at Ida's. "The annual meeting. I will be there. I will be making a presentation to the homeowners. You have a choice. You can stand with her and go down with the ship, or you can stand up, present the true financial state of this HOA, and tell the truth. The choice is yours. A." He stared at the floor for a full minute. "A, she'll destroy me." "A, she's already destroying you," I corrected him. "A, am offering you a life raft." He finally looked up. "A, what do you need me to do?" My coalition was forming. The fearful Alley had provided the audio. The disillusioned insider was ready to provide the financial data. I had the law, the documents, and the police report. All the pieces were in place. But Karen had one last move. It was an act of pure, desperate spite. 3 days before the annual meeting, a notice was posted on the community clubhouse door. It was a formal announcement of a lien filed against my property for $2,000. The original fines, plus another $1,000 for illegal consultation fees. She had actually done it. She had clouded my title based on a fraudulent claim. I smiled when I saw it. I took a clear photograph with my phone. It was the capstone of my collection. Her final, most arrogant, and most easily disproven act of hubris. She thought it was a finishing blow. She had no idea it was the final page of my indictment. The stage was now set for the annual meeting. It was time for the curtain to rise. The Northwood Estates clubhouse was a modest single-story building, with a large meeting room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. On the night of the annual meeting it was packed. Every one of the 57 households in the development seemed to be represented. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Word had spread. This was not going to be a routine meeting about landscaping budgets and swimming pool hours. This was going to be a reckoning. I arrived early and took a seat in the back row. I had a single, slim leather briefcase with me. Sarah had wanted to come, to present the case herself in her sharp, intimidating lawyerly fashion. But I had declined. This was not a legal proceeding. It was a community meeting. It needed to be handled by a neighbor, not an outsider. And this was my home and I would defend it myself. Karen and the board sat at a long table at the front of the room. She was in her element, wearing a sharp navy blue blazer, a string of pearls around her neck. She looked confident, presidential. Gerald sat to her right, looking pale and twitchy. Brenda sat to her left, staring intently at her notepad. Marcus, the treasurer, sat at the far end, avoiding everyone's gaze. Karen's supporters, a clique of about a dozen homeowners who benefited from her favoritism, were seated in the front rows, their faces arranged in smug, supportive expressions. The meeting began with the usual formalities. The Pledge of Allegiance, the approval of the previous meeting's minutes. Then Karen stood up. She adjusted the microphone. "A good evening, everyone. Before we get to the budget review, there is a serious matter we must address as a community." Her voice was somber, heavy with practiced gravity. This was her performance. As many of you know, the board was recently forced to take action regarding a derelict vehicle that was in violation of our covenants for many months. This action was not taken lightly. But we have a duty to uphold the rules that protect our property values and the aesthetic of our neighborhood. She paused, letting the weight of her adudia settle over the room. Unfortunately, this necessary action has been met with hostility and threats from the homeowner in question, Mr. James Peterson. The spotlight was on me. I met her gaze and held it. My expression, unreadable. "Mr. Peterson," she continued, her voice beginning to tremble with manufactured emotion. A has chosen to respond, not with compliance, but with aggression. He has made legal threats. He has harassed board members. He even forced me to call the sheriff to my own home because I feared for my safety. A few gasps came from the front rows. The performance was working, at least on her choir. This board will not be intimidated, she declared, her voice rising. We will not be bullied by anyone who thinks they are above the rules that the rest of us live by. The fines levied against Mr. Peterson are valid. The lien placed on his property is valid. And the truck, she said with a triumphant sneer, is gone. We did our job. Are there any questions? Silence. No one dared to speak. Her supporters began a smattering of applause. Karen smiled, a victorious smile. She was about to sit down when I stood up. I have a question, I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried in the suddenly silent room. Actually. I have a presentation. Karen's smile tightened. Mr. Peterson, this is not the forum for your grievances. This is a business meeting. On the contrary, Karen, I said, walking slowly toward the front of the room. This is precisely the forum. This is about the business of our community. And since you have publicly accused me of several things, rigorous rules of order grant me the right to a response. I believe you run these meetings by rigorous rules, do you not? She was trapped. Denying me the right to speak would be a procedural violation in front of the entire community. She glanced at her allies, then back at me. Fine, she spat. You have 5 minutes. I will only need what is necessary, I said. I reached the small lectern set up for residents, placing my briefcase on it. I opened it and took out a single slim folder. Not the thick one, filled with 5 years of history, but a new one. This was the surgical kit. You have made several statements. Karen? I'd like to address them, not with opinions or emotions, but with facts and documents. I turned to the homeowners. First, the matter of the trucker's ownership and status. Mrs. Vance referred to it as a derelict vehicle. Here, I said, holding up a document. A copy of the current registration for that truck. It is registered to Sergeant David Peterson, of the United States Army. I held up a second document, and here is a copy of his deployment orders, placing him on active duty overseas. This is not a derelict vehicle. It is the legally owned property of a soldier serving his country. A murmur went through the crowd. I continued, my voice calm and steady. Second, the matter of notification. Mrs. Vance claimed the board was not aware of my SONA status. She suggested I was using it as an excuse after the fact. Here. I held up the green certified mail receipt, i.e., the return receipt for the letter I sent to the HOA 3 weeks before the tow. It is signed by board member Brenda Wilson. Brenda sank lower in her chair, her face bright red. And, for anyone who doubts the contents of that letter, I said, pulling Mr. Jang Henderson's USB drive from my pocket. I have here an audio recording of the board meeting where Mrs. Vance herself acknowledges receiving the letter and instructs the board to ignore it. The room erupted in whispers. Carrie's face went from smug to stony. Gerald was sweating profusely. Third, I went on, my pace deliberate. At the matter of the vote to tow the truck, the covenants require a quorum of the board for any binding vote. The audio recording proves that only 3 of the 5 board members were present. Brenda Wilson abstained. Marcus Thorne and Karen Vance voted in favor. That is not a legal majority of the 5-member board. The vote itself was procedurally invalid. I turned to Marcus. Marcus, you are the treasurer. You are sworn to uphold the financial integrity of this association. Is that correct? Marcus, looking terrified but resolute, stood up. He cleared his throat. Yes, that is correct. Marcus, did Karen Vance also instruct you to use funds from the emergency reserve account to pay for non-emergency projects, such as the curb in front of her personal residence? Yes, Marcus said, his voice stronger now. I have the records here, He held up a file folder. Our reserve fund is dangerously low, and our insurance broker has confirmed that any liability arising from the tow of Sergeant Peter Sinna's truck will not be covered, as it was a willful, illegal act. The cost will fall directly on the homeowners. The room was in an uproar now. People were shouting questions. Karen was banging a gavel on the table, but no one was listening. "Order! Order!" she yelled, her voice cracking. I held up my hand for silence. To my surprise, the room quieted. All eyes were on me. "And that brings me to my final point," I said, my voice dropping. "The most important point of all. All of this of the tow, the fines, the lina, all of it was justified by Karen and the board based on an amendment to our covenants. The so-called 90-day rule." I held up the last document from my folder. It was the copy of the amendment. This is that amendment? It was filed with the county 2 years ago. It appears on the surface to be a legal document. But it has a fatal flaw, I looked directly at Gerald Finley. Gerald, you notarized this document, correct? Yes. Looked like a cornered animal. Pos? I did. Ah, you were a commissioned notary public in this state, on that date. Ah, yes. Of course, he blustered. That's interesting, I said, my voice laced with ice. Because here is a certified copy of your record from the Secretary of State's office. It shows that your notary commission was revoked for failure to maintain a bond 6 months prior to the date on this amendment. I held the document high for everyone to see. You acted without authority. You affixed your seal to a document you had no legal right to notarize. That is a criminal offense. Gerald made a small choking sound and slumped in his chair. What this means, I said, turning back to the stunned homeowners, is that this amendment is void, it is worthless. It never had any legal power. Every fine levied under it, every threat made, and, most importantly, the authority to tow my Sonas trucka. It was all based on a lie. It was based on a fraudulent document. I paused, letting the full weight of the revelation land. I looked at Karen. The mask was gone. Her face was a canvas of pure, undiluted shock. The color had drained away, leaving a pale, waxy sheen. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes, which had been so full of fire and self-righteousness, were now blank. It was the look of a person whose entire reality has just been dismantled. In front of a live audience, she had no idea. Well, she had built her kingdom on a foundation of paper, and I had just produced a single better piece of paper that brought the whole thing crashing down. So to summarize, I said, my voice ringing with clarity in the tomb-quiet room. The HOA, under the direction of Karen Vance, has committed the following acts. The illegal seizure of property belonging to a protected service member, in violation of federal law. The willful violation of its own bylaws regarding meeting procedure and voting. The misappropriation of community funds. The filing of a fraudulent property lien. And the creation and enforcement of a covenant amendment based on a criminal act of false notarization. I closed my folder. The click of the clasp was like a gunshot. I am not here tonight to ask for an apology. I am here to inform you that my attorney has, an hour ago, filed a lawsuit in county court against the Northwood Estates HOA and against Karen Vance and Gerald Finley as individuals. We are seeking the immediate return of the vehicle, full reimbursement for all storage fees and any damages, punitive damages as allowed under the SCRA, the immediate removal of the fraudulent lien, a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances for the past 5 years, and the invalidation of every rule and fine ever passed or levied under the authority of a fraudulent amendment. I turned and looked directly at Karen. You wanted to make an example of me, I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. You have succeeded. Then I walked back to my seat, sat down, and waited for the community I had just liberated to find its voice. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The meeting descended into chaos, but it was a purposeful chaos. A motion was made from the floor by one of Karen's former supporters to recall her as president. It passed with a near-unanimous voice. Vote. Another motion to recall Gerald and Brenda passed just as quickly. An emergency election was scheduled, and Marcus Thorne, the man who had found his conscience, was nominated to be the interim president. He accepted, his face a mixture of terror and relief. Karen didn't say another word. She sat frozen behind the table as her power was dismantled piece by piece. When the meeting was finally mercifully adjourned, she stood up like a robot, gathered her papers, and walked out of the clubhouse without looking at anyone. She was no longer a queen in her castle. She was just a woman in a blazer who was about to face a very long and very expensive legal battle. The next morning, I drove to Viper Recovery and Storage. It was in a bleak, dusty part of the county, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. I walked into the small, grimy office. A large man with a shaved head and tattoos covering his arm sat behind a plexiglass barrier. He looked up from his magazine, his expression bored and hostile. "Ah, yeah. What do you want?" he grunted. "I am here about a 1988 Ford F-150 red. Towed from Northwood Estates a week ago. I said it gonna be expensive," he sneered, already reaching for a calculator. "A tow, a week of storage at $200 a day. Admin fees you're looking at about $2,000. Cash only." I did not say anything. I slid a piece of paper under the plexiglass. It was a letter from Sarah's law firm. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that the vehicle was the subject of active litigation, that the initial tow was illegal, and that any attempt to hold the vehicle or demand payment would be met with an immediate court order and a lawsuit against Viper Recovery for conversion and violation of the SCRA. It also included a copy of the police report, where I had laid out the case for Officer Miller. The man picked it up. He read it. His sneer faltered. He read it again, his lips moving silently. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowed. "You cannot just your tow was based on an order from a private citizen, Karen Vance, who had no legal authority to issue that order," I said calmly. "You are currently in possession of stolen property. You have two options. You can release the vehicle to me, right now, at no charge, and my attorney will not name your company in the lawsuit. Or, you can refuse, and you will become a co-defendant with the HOA. The choice is yours." He stared at me, then at the letter. He saw the name of the law firm. He saw the reference to federal law. He was a predator, but he was not a fool. He knew when he was outgunned. He let out a long, frustrated sigh. "You the owner. I hold power of attorney for the owner," I said. I slid a copy of the POA and my driver's license under the glass. He looked at my license. He looked at the name, James Peterson. Then he looked at the POA, which listed my SONAS rank and my own retired rank. His entire demeanor changed. The hostility evaporated, replaced by something else. Respect. He stood up. "Oh, wait here," he said. He disappeared into a back room. A minute later he returned, holding a key with a paper tag on it. He unlocked a door on his side of the barrier. He was no longer looking at me like a mark. He was looking at me like a person. The lady, the HOA lady. he said, his voice quiet. She told us it was abandoned junk. She signed the papers saying she had the right. We were just doing the job. I know, I said. He held out the key. I'm sorry about your soonest truck, Colonel, he said. The title felt different coming from him. It wasn't an insult. It was an honorific. There's no charge. Let me show you where it is. He walked me out into the yard, a vast graveyard of wrecked and impounded cars. And there it was, parked in a corner, covered in a week's worth of dust, but otherwise unharmed. The candy apple red paint was still bright under the grime. It looked proud, defiant. Even here. I thank you, I said. No. Thank you, Colonel. He said, for your service. And your son's. He turned and walked back to his office without another word. I got in the truck. The cab smelled of old vinyl, gasoline, and faint, lingering traces of my father's pipe tobacco. I put the key in the ignition, turned it, and the engine roared to life on the first try. My son and my father had built it well. I drove it out of that yard, leaving the world of liens and lawyers behind me, and headed for home. The legal and community fallout was total. The lawsuit proceeded, but it didn't get far. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the HOA insurance company settled almost immediately, paying for the non-existent tow and storage fees, plus a significant sum in damages, which I placed in a trust for David. The State Attorney General's office opened an investigation into Gerald Finley for fraudulent notarization. He pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor, paid a fine, and lost his real estate license. Karen Vance was ruined. The settlement didn't cover her personal liability. She was forced to pay my legal fees out of her own pocket. The public humiliation was worse. People she had lorded it over for years now crossed the street to avoid her. Her clique of supporters abandoned her. Within 6 months, a for Salah sign appeared on her lawn. The day she moved out, no one came to say goodbye. Under Marcuse's leadership, the HOA began to heal. He called a special meeting where he proposed rescinding every restrictive rule Karen had ever passed. The mailboxes, the lawn ornaments, the paint colors. The vote was unanimous. He then announced that the board had reviewed all fines levied in the past 5 years and would be refunding any that were deemed arbitrary or excessive. A few weeks later, a check for $1,275 appeared in my mailbox. Full refund for every petty fine I had ever paid. I had kept the receipts, and now, so had they. Mr. Henderson's roses thrived without threat. People started putting up basketball hoops and colorful welcome mats again. The neighborhood began to feel like a community again, not a camp. People started talking to me, waving when I was in the yard. They didn't call me Colonel. They called me James. A few months later, I received an email from David. It was short, just a few lines. Hey Dad, got your letters. Sounds like things got a little wild back home. Sorry you had to deal with that. How's the truck? I sat on my porch in my worn armchair, looking at the empty space in the driveway where the truck usually sat. I had taken it to a detailer, had it washed and waxed until it shone like a new penny. What? Now it was safe in the garage, waiting for him. The world felt quiet again. The order I cherished had been disturbed, but it had been restored. Not by shouting or by anger, but by the quiet, relentless power of rules and the paper they were written on. It was never about the truck. It was about the principle that you don't mess with a soldier's truck. You don't mess with his family, and you don't under any circumstances ignore the fine print. Because some of us actually take the time to read it. I typed back my reply. The truck is fine, son. Everything is fine. Come home safe. Up and